I always knew marrying into Daniel's family wouldn't be easy, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened on our wedding day. Surrounded by white roses, crystal chandeliers, and over 200 guests, I stood by the cake table, waiting for our first dance. That's when I heard it, his aunt laughing, then his voice, loud and clear. "She looks more like the maid than the bride." My heart stopped. He didn't know I was standing right behind him. I smiled, turned away quietly, and made one swift decision. If they thought I was the maid, then the real maid had a shift to cover. Before we dive deeper into the story, tell us, what country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. And if you enjoy dropping real life twists, don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss a moment. Before I met Daniel, I always thought weddings were magical. I imagined the music, the vows, the joy. But nothing prepared me for the moment when, on what should have been the happiest day of my life, my new husband humiliated me in front of everyone I loved. It wasn't the usual cold feet or awkward speech. No, Daniel leaned in with a smug grin and called me something I'll never forget. The maid. He laughed like it was a joke, but I wasn't laughing. Neither was anyone else. It started long before the wedding day. From the beginning, Daniel's family never approved of me. I wasn't from their world. They were the kind of people who passed wealth down like recipes, who believed connections mattered more than character. I was raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs just so I could finish college. I came into Daniel's life with ambition and work ethic, not inherited trust funds or family business shares. His mother always found subtle ways to put me down. "You're very practical, aren't you?" she once said while glancing at my off-the-rack dress. His sister followed suit, acting like I was a hired hand rather than family, but I let it go, for Daniel. As the wedding drew closer, the small digs became bolder. Venue choices were changed without my input. The guest list ballooned with people I'd never met, mostly business partners and country club acquaintances. Even the color palette I'd picked for the flowers was overridden. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was marrying the man I loved, not his entitled family. But the cracks had started to form, and on the day of the rehearsal dinner, everything began to unravel. Daniel's aunt, a sharp, tongued woman with a fondness for champagne and cruelty, mistook me for the wedding planner. She shoved a list in my hand and said, "Make sure the table settings are correct this time, would you?" I looked at her, stunned. "I'm the bride," I said. Her eyes widened for a split second before she burst out laughing. "Well, you're certainly dressed like the help." I wore a simple blue dress, not flashy, not designer, but it was clean and classic. Daniel didn't defend me, he just said, "You know how Aunt Regina is." I wanted to believe he wasn't like them, that he saw me, valued me, but doubt crept in like cold water under a door. On our wedding morning, I got ready alone. No bridesmaids. His sister had convinced him to keep the bridal party small and traditional, meaning entirely his friends and family. My mom, bless her heart, tried to make the morning feel special. She brought me breakfast and sat with me while I put on my gown. But I felt alone. I felt like a guest in someone else's celebration. When I walked down the aisle, I noticed something else. People weren't looking at me with joy. They were sizing me up, whispering, judging. It felt like I'd stepped into a spotlight on a stage where I wasn't wanted. Still, I smiled. I told myself it would all be worth it once the ceremony was over and we could finally begin our lives together. I kept telling myself that even as Daniel made a smug remark during our vows about me being really good at laundry. Laughter rippled through his side of the aisle. Mine stayed quiet. At the reception, things hit their peak. After the toasts and first dance, Daniel stood to speak. "I just want to say how grateful I am," he began, smiling. "I've found the one woman who will not only love me, but probably vacuum better than anyone I know." More laughter. Then he looked at me and said it. "Honestly, I'm lucky. Most guys don't get to marry the maid." There was a beat of silence. My mother's face went pale. I stood, heart pounding in my chest, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Then I smiled, not a kind smile, a knowing one, because what Daniel, and his entire smug family, didn't know was that I'd planned for this. I'd expected something ugly. Maybe not this exact moment, but I had come prepared. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't scream. I simply raised my champagne glass and said, "Well, if I'm the maid, I guess it's only fair the real lady of the house handles the cleanup." Then I turned toward Daniel's sister, the one who had sneered at my dress, mocked my background, and whispered at the rehearsal dinner that girls like me always try to marry up. The murmurs began, cameras were rolling, and I had more than a few things to say. I didn't walk out of the wedding reception. Not yet. That would have given Daniel the power, the final word. No, I stayed, and with every second, my posture straightened and my confidence grew. Because what none of them knew was that I'd seen this coming for months. Daniel's sarcasm, his family's disdain, the subtle ways they tried to turn our wedding into a performance instead of a partnership. It all added up. And while they tried to treat me like a second-class guest at my own celebration, I'd been planning something far more poetic. After Daniel's maid comment, the laughter faded quickly. Some people looked around awkwardly, trying to figure out if it had been a joke or an insult. My mother covered her mouth in disbelief. A few of my friends exchanged worried glances, and Daniel grinned like he'd won something. I raised my glass calmly and smiled right back. "You know, since I'm just the maid," I said slowly, making sure the microphone picked up every word. "I suppose I shouldn't have to explain why there are 3 new cars parked outside, or why the cake says congratulations, Vanessa on the bottom layer. That got their attention." Daniel blinked. "What are you talking about?" I gestured toward the wedding cake, a towering 4-tier structure custom, designed to look like his family's vacation estate. I'd seen it during setup. But what no one knew was that I had requested a small message to be piped onto the underside of the bottom tier, where it would be hidden unless someone specifically pointed it out, Vanessa, his assistant. "You see," I continued, turning toward the crowd, "Vanessa has been very helpful these past few months, helping Daniel with scheduling, work travel, and hotel arrangements, especially the ones under his personal card." Gasps. Audible gasps. His sister stood up abruptly. Daniel looked like a balloon losing air. "That's a lie," he stammered. "You're making things up." I reached into my small beaded clutch and pulled out a neatly folded envelope. "This is a copy of the receipt from the park. You stayed there with Vanessa 3 weeks ago, Daniel. I called the front desk myself. They confirmed 2 guests, 1 suite, under your corporate account, which was also tied to our joint wedding fund." Murmurs rippled across the room. And just in case anyone thinks this is some kind of elaborate misunderstanding, I handed the envelope to Daniel's mother, who had previously told me I was lucky to be marrying into their family. "There's also a signed room service slip, with Vanessa's name spelled out clearly, in your handwriting." His mother's hands trembled. She looked up at Daniel, whose face had gone ghost. "White, you think this is funny?" he snapped. "No," I replied. "I think it's tragic, but not for me, for you." I turned back to the mic. "Everyone, I appreciate you being here tonight. I know you came to celebrate what was supposed to be a joyful union. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen. Not in the way you expected." My voice remained calm, every syllable crisp and deliberate, but I'm not walking out of here ashamed. I'm walking out with my head held high, because I never lied, I never cheated, I never pretended to be someone I wasn't, unlike some people. I glanced again at Daniel, who was now frantically whispering to his father. "Oh, and one more thing," I said, raising a hand. "Before this event, I changed the contract on the honeymoon suite. The reservation is now under a different name, mine, paid for in full with my own card. Since I clearly won't be using it with Daniel, I've invited someone else." Gasps again. Daniel's father stood now, red in the face. "Someone else," Daniel hissed. "Who?" I smiled. "My best friend Leela, the one who told me, months ago, that she overheard you talking to Vanessa behind the wine cellar at your parents' summer home." Leela, standing in the back, gave a small wave and held up her own copy of a receipt. "We're going to Bali," I continued, "because while you were busy lying and sneering, I was planning a new beginning." It was a surreal moment. A ballroom full of weld, rest people suddenly too stunned to move. Servers stood frozen with trays of champagne. the DJ unsure whether to kill the music or let it play, and there I was in my wedding gown, calmly dismantling the man who tried to humiliate me. And yet I didn't cry, not once, because I had cried enough, in silence, in private. Now all I felt was clarity. I turned to my mom, who had tears in her eyes, not of sadness, but pride. She walked up and hugged me tightly. "I knew you'd handle it with grace," she whispered. Then came the moment that sealed it. Daniel stepped forward, panic written all over his face. "We can talk about this," he pleaded. "You're blowing things out of proportion. I was drunk. It didn't mean anything." I looked at him. All the love I once had now replaced with nothing but a hollow silence. "You treated me like a maid," I said. "Now let's see how well your real family cleans this mess up." And then, with my head high and my train trailing behind me, I turned and walked away from the man who'd tried to break me, and into the next chapter I'd already started writing. I didn't just walk out of that wedding reception. I walked straight into the spotlight of my own liberation. By the time I stepped into the waiting car that my best friend Leela had arranged, news had already started circulating beyond the ballroom. A guest posted a vague status on Facebook: "Wedding gone wild, groom caught red-handed, the bride total queen." It got picked up faster than I could process, and by the time we reached the hotel suite downtown, where Leela and I planned to stay before our impromptu honeymoon to Bali, my phone was buzzing nonstop. But I ignored it. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. The next morning, I woke up to find my name trending locally on social media. Someone had posted a video of my speech from the wedding, edited with dramatic music and captions. Normally, something like that would have horrified me, but this time it felt empowering. The video painted me not as a jilted bride, but as a woman who stood her ground with poise and clarity. Messages from strangers started pouring in. Women thanking me, people saying I gave them courage. Even some wedding guests reached out privately to say how ashamed they were of laughing at Daniel's Maid comment, and how stunned they were by my composure. But Daniel wasn't done trying to control the narrative. That same day, he posted a note on his Instagram stories: "Weddings are emotional, mistakes were made, hope everyone can move forward with kindness." It was a half-hearted attempt to downplay everything. Worse, he tried messaging me privately, asking to clarify things. He said he'd been drunk, that it was a joke, that I overreacted, but I didn't bite, not because I was bitter, but because I finally saw him clearly. This wasn't a one-time misstep, this was a pattern. A slow, calculated erosion of respect, hidden beneath sarcastic jokes and subtle digs. Meanwhile, Leela and I flew to Bali as planned. I swapped my white wedding dress for a breezy sundress and walked the beach with sand between my toes instead of nerves in my stomach. We toasted coconut drinks under the sunset and danced barefoot to ocean drums. Each day, I shed a layer of resentment, a weight I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. I journaled every night, not out of sadness, but reflection. I wasn't just recovering. I was rewriting. By the fourth day, I finally answered a call from my cousin Sarah, one of the few family members who had stayed silent during the wedding fallout. I just wanted to say. She began, her voice tentative, "I'm proud of you." That was powerful, thank you, I said. It wasn't easy, but it felt necessary. She hesitated. "Do you know what's happening back home?" "No, and I'm not really checking." I admitted. "Well," she said with a dry laugh, "Daniel's parents are in damage control. His mom tried to have the cake company refund her, saying the message on the bottom was unauthorized. The bakery posted a response with screenshots of the approved design, your signature included." I laughed, truly laughed. Good, let them taste accountability for once. Also, Sarah added, "Vanessa quit." My eyebrows rose, seriously. Apparently she didn't expect things to go public, or maybe she thought she'd become the next bride. Well, I sighed. Daniel always was generous with delusions. Back home, Daniel was struggling to patch his reputation. Word had gotten out in his professional circle, no thanks to me, that he'd misused company funds for personal hotel stays. An anonymous tip had gone to HR at his firm. I never said anything directly, but I didn't have to. When people show you who they are, the truth eventually catches up. Fast, by the time I returned, my apartment felt like a clean slate. Leela had helped clear out the last of Daniel's belongings while I was gone. A few boxes sat stacked by the door with his name scribbled in thick marker. No ceremony, no drama, just closure. One of the last items was a small jewelry box. I opened it out of habit and found the engagement ring he'd given me, still gleaming, still worthless. Not in money, but in meaning. I closed the box and dropped it in the nearest charity donation bag. Someone else could give it a new story. I returned to work the following Monday with quiet confidence. My team welcomed me with genuine warmth, and like Daniel's hollow applause. My manager pulled me aside to say, "Saw the video. I know you didn't post it, but I hope you know. You had every right to say what you said. That meant more than I expected." Not because I needed validation, but because I'd spent years being told to stay calm. Don't make waves, just laugh it off. And now, I was done shrinking to make others comfortable. A few weeks later, I got an invitation I never saw coming. A women's leadership conference wanted me to be their opening speaker. The theme, Finding Your Voice. I nearly cried when I read the email. When I stood on that stage, I didn't talk about revenge. I didn't talk about bitterness. I talked about boundaries, about recognizing red flags before they become routines, about self, worth and walking away, not as a failure but as a decision maker. And when I looked out into the crowd of women, some nodding, some wiping tears, I realized something bigger than the wedding had happened. I hadn't just taken control of my narrative. I'd handed others the pen too. I had let the audio clip speak. But now, my voice was louder than ever. A month after the wedding fiasco, life had started settling into a new kind of rhythm. Calmer, more intentional, and much more honest. The whirlwind of public support, social media buzz, and messages from people I hadn't heard from in years eventually slowed. But what lingered wasn't the noise. It was the clarity. Clarity about what I wanted, who I was, and what I would no longer tolerate. I returned to work with sharper boundaries and a deeper sense of self-worth. For years, I had been the one to stay late, to say yes when it hurt, to accommodate unreasonable demands because I thought that's what loyalty looked like. But the wedding taught me that misplaced loyalty can become self-betrayal. Now I wasn't afraid to say no. And surprisingly, the world didn't fall apart. In fact, it respected me more. My manager noticed. She started inviting me into more leadership meetings, asking for my input on initiatives I'd previously only heard about after the fact. "Your voice is sharp," she said once. "We need that." I never thought that the biggest turning point in my career would come from the lowest point in my personal life. But here we were. Meanwhile, Daniel's life was unraveling at a pace I couldn't have predicted. Not because I was keeping tabs. He was being publicly messy enough that I didn't have to. A mutual acquaintance told me his firm had put him on leave pending an internal investigation. Apparently, more than one female employee had come forward about inappropriate comments and manipulation. The timing felt poetic, but I didn't celebrate it. I didn't need to. Karma was doing just fine on its own. Then came the email from Vanessa. It landed in my inbox on a Tuesday morning, just as I was finishing up a proposal deck. The subject line read, "I owe you an apology." For a second, I considered deleting it without reading, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hi, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I want to say I'm sorry. What I did at your wedding, the role I played in all of it, was inexcusable. I let my jealousy blind me, and I let Daniel manipulate me into believing lies about you. I've left him, not just because of what he did, but because I realized the kind of person I was becoming with him. I saw the video of your speech. You didn't scream, you didn't humiliate. You just told the truth. That's something I was too scared to do anyway. I hope you're well. You didn't deserve what happened. And you didn't deserve to be treated like less at your own wedding." Vanessa, I sat there for a while, just staring at the screen. Not because I was angry or vindicated, but because the email made something inside me shift. Vanessa wasn't the villain I had made her out to be. Not completely, anyway. She had made terrible choices, yes, But she too had been under Daniel's charm, twisted in the web of his subtle manipulations and inflated charisma. And she had found her way out. I didn't respond, not because I didn't appreciate it, but because some chapters needed to stay closed. Around that time, my story continued spreading online, evolving from a viral video to something with more impact. A writer from a major digital magazine reached out and asked if I'd be willing to do a feature interview. Not just about the wedding, she clarified, but about how women reclaim power in moments of public humiliation. I agreed not because I wanted more attention, but because I knew how many people were quietly enduring their own silencing. At weddings, in boardrooms, in families, the article went live under the title, "The Bride Who Took the Mic Back, and Everything After." It wasn't just about what happened on the mic that night, it was about what came after, the rebuilding, the truth, telling, the choice not to shrink. The response was overwhelming. Even more messages came in, some from women, some from men, even a few from older women who said they'd stayed in disrespectful marriages for decades because that's just how it was back then. One message hit me hard. It read, "I watched your video with my teenage daughter. She said, 'That's who I want to be like.' Thank you for giving her that image." That's when I realized this had never really been about Daniel, or the wedding, or even the betrayal. It was about representation, about redefining what strength looks like in moments when society expects women to fold. Later that week, I was invited to consult on a community nonprofit initiative focused on empowering young women in low-income neighborhoods through public speaking and leadership workshops. The director had seen the article and believed I could help them shape a new curriculum. "You understand what it means to be silenced and still choose to speak," she told me. I joined as a part-time consultant and eventually board advisor. The work was invigorating. I met girls who had already been told their voices were too loud, their dreams unrealistic. But week after week, I watched them speak more clearly, more confidently. And every time they did, I felt a piece of myself healing too. One day after a workshop, a 16-year-old named Brielle walked up to me. "You know what I liked about your wedding story?" she asked. I smiled. "What?" "You didn't fight back the way people expect. You didn't scream. You didn't throw things. You just told the truth and walked away." Her words stuck with me long after. Not all revenge is loud. Not all justice looks like fireworks. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away with your dignity intact, and then use your voice to help others find theirs. A few weeks after joining the nonprofit as a board advisor, I found myself sitting in a sunlit cafe, sipping coffee with the program director, Maya. We were reviewing a draft curriculum that introduced storytelling as a tool for self-empowerment. Maya was animated, passionate, full of ideas. She reminded me of a younger version of myself, before I'd learned to hold my tongue, before I learned to shrink so others could feel comfortable. "You have a natural presence," she said, looking over her glasses. "Have you ever thought about hosting workshops yourself?" I laughed, a little caught off guard. "Me? I'm not exactly a public speaker." Maya tilted her head. "You spoke at your wedding with the entire room staring. You knew people would whisper, and still, you said what needed to be said. That's what these girls need to see." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Brielle, the 16-year-old who told me she admired how I walked away without screaming. What if there were more like her? What if I could help them write their own endings before someone else tried to? So I said yes. I began running monthly workshops. At first, it was nerve-wracking. I wasn't used to being the center of attention unless it was forced on me. But something shifted the moment I started reading real stories of betrayal, resilience, recovery, and watched the way the girls leaned in. Their eyes lit up when they saw themselves reflected in narratives that didn't end with silence or shame. These weren't just workshops, they became spaces of reclamation. At the third session, one girl stayed behind. Her name was Nura. She was quiet, brilliant, and sharp-eyed. She handed me a folded piece of paper after the session. "This is my story," she said. "I don't want to read it out loud yet, but I want you to know it." Later that night, I read it. Her words spilled across the page. like a wound being stitched together with thread made of hope. She had lost her father, been bullied at school, and was raising her younger siblings while her mother worked 3 jobs. But she still dreamed of becoming a lawyer. I sat there humbled. My story had gone viral, hers hadn't, but it carried just as much weight, maybe more. A week later, I helped her craft a college application essay based on that story. She submitted it to 3 schools. 2 months after that, she got into all of them, with scholarships. That's when I realized this was bigger than my recovery. It was about sparking recoveries in others. I wasn't just moving forward, I was becoming part of something restorative, generational. Meanwhile, my own personal life began to find a new rhythm. For a long time, I had been hesitant to let new people in. After what happened with Daniel, I questioned my instincts, my boundaries, even my worth. But healing works slowly and thoroughly. It doesn't shout, it whispers. A man named Theo entered my life quietly. We met through a mutual friend at a book launch event. He wasn't loud or flashy. He asked thoughtful questions, listened when I spoke, and never once made me feel like I had to prove my value. On our 3rd date, I told him the wedding story, not the viral, polished version, but the raw one. I braced for judgment. Instead, he said, that wasn't just brave, that was leadership. I didn't fall in love overnight, but I did let my guard down piece by piece. Theo never rushed me. He understood that trust isn't built in grand gestures. It's built in the quiet, consistent way someone shows up. And he showed up, again and again. One afternoon, as we walked through a weekend street market, he paused at a small vendor stand selling handmade journals. He picked one up, opened the first page, and wrote, "To new chapters." He handed it to me, "For your stories, the ones you haven't told yet." It became my favorite thing I owned, as the 1-year anniversary of the wedding approached. Meyer and I planned a special workshop, owning the mic. It was a full-day event dedicated to public speaking, self-expression, and unapologetic visibility. I debated whether to mention the anniversary in my opening speech. Part of me wanted to pretend the date didn't matter, but that would have gone against everything I now stood for. So I acknowledged it. A year ago today. I told the room I stood in a white dress and took a mic to tell the truth. I didn't know if people would listen. I didn't know if I'd lose everything, but I knew I couldn't stay silent. Today, I'm not just reclaiming that moment, I'm building on it. There were tears, applause, and more importantly, there were girls, brilliant, brave girls, taking the mic after me and speaking their truths, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. After the event, Nura came up to me again. "I'm thinking of applying for a summer legal internship," she said, "even though I'm only a freshman." "Do it," I said. "You don't have to wait for permission to take space." I walked out that day not as the woman who had been humiliated at her wedding, but as someone entirely new. Someone forged in the fire of public scrutiny and personal rebirth. I had stopped asking, "Why me?" and started asking, "What now?" The answers kept showing up, in every girl who found her voice, in every parent who thanked me for helping their daughter speak up, and in every quiet moment I spent writing in that journal Theo gave me. The world had seen 1 chapter, but I had so many more to write. Looking back now, I realize the wedding wasn't the end of my love story. It was the end of a chapter I was never meant to finish. When he called me a maid, in front of everyone, he thought he was making a joke. But jokes like that don't come from nowhere. They come from a place of quiet disrespect that's been simmering for years. What he didn't expect was that I had already learned to hear that quiet, and I had already decided I would never tolerate it again. The night I picked up that mic, I wasn't just speaking to him. I was speaking to every woman who has been belittled, humiliated, or dismissed in the exact moment she was supposed to feel celebrated. I was speaking to the version of myself who once would have cried in silence and kept going, hoping he'd treat me better next time. There wouldn't be a next time. In the months that followed, the video of that moment traveled farther than I could have imagined. Messages poured in, women thanking me, strangers cheering me on, and even a few men apologizing for things they hadn't realized they'd said or done in their own lives. It was overwhelming, yes, but also healing. But what mattered most wasn't the attention. It was the freedom, the clarity. The decision I made not to be anyone's background character. Not in my relationships, not in my career, not in my own story. I never wanted revenge. I wanted peace, and peace came not when I got justice, but when I chose to stop seeking validation from someone who never truly saw me. My voice is mine now. My life is mine now. And this time, I'm not waiting for anyone to hand me the mic.